Hey everyone, it's Sevi. He's on his 4th banner already, but we never run out of new players interested in raising a child. To help you with your journey in parenthood, I'm making this video summarizing Childe's top recommended teams, including his pre-Dendro and new Dendro comps. I'm not going to discuss his mechanics and builds in detail as there's really not much new to explore in those regards, but I'll link below an older video I made on certain mechanics. Instead, I'll be helping you discover what teams you can try with him and maybe in the process help you find which will be your favorite Childe team. But first, let's quickly summarize Childe's role and playstyle. Childe has a special mechanic called Riptide, which allows him to mark enemies and make them continuously trigger AoE hydro damage and application. He's very deadly in multi-target scenarios since triggering his Riptide simultaneously causes what is called quadratic scaling damage. The TLDR of it is, grouping together enemies while triggering Riptides causes an exponential increase in your damage. Combining his Riptides with his normal attacks, charge attacks, and his burst makes him an extremely good hydro applicator. This allows him to fulfill numerous roles regarding hydro-related reactions, which you'll learn more of as we go through his teams. He also has to be on field for a while to do his job as a DPS and hydro applicator, which means he works best with off-field supports or damage dealers whose abilities work in conjunction with him. But when it comes to his rotations and timing, Childe does require a bit more attention due to his unique cooldown management, especially if he's at C0. Because the longer Childe stays in his melee stance, the longer his skill cooldown becomes. If he overstays his welcome, you get punished with a long cooldown which can extend your rotation longer than you'd like. Typically, a C0 Childe's field time would be around 8 to 10 seconds. You may also want to learn how to do optimal attack strings with him to maximize his damage output, but some of these can also come down to personal preference, stamina management, or feasibility in the combat scenario. N2C will apply Hydro very fast and can be the strongest combo, but it's very draining on stamina. N3C uses less stamina, leaving some room for dashes and dodges. N5C is recommended for weapons like Rust and Thundering Pulse, which buff normal attacks, and less frequent charged attacks means less knockback for light enemies. It also preserves your stamina the most among the combos. These can be strung consecutively or mixed to fit your needs and field time. Later on, you'll see in my rotation samples that they will be labeled as melee combos, which will be left to your preference. So we'll first go through his pre-Dendro teams, which are still strong even now, and then we'll tackle his brand new Dendro synergies and comps. Some of these teams do require certain members to pull off, but some will be more dependent on elemental templates, so it's up to your own considerations which teams will be right for you. Let's first start with arguably his most popular team, whose core is composed of Childe, Bennett, and Xiangling. This team has a very good reputation for its meta status as it comes with a very high single target and multi-target damage ceiling. Childe and Xiangling are a match made in heaven for a Reverse Vaporize team. While Childe is on field applying lots of Hydro and dealing AoE Hydro damage, Xiangling's Pyronado will vaporize enemies. Alongside that, Childe can deal his own huge Vaporize nuke via his burst. Of course, Bennett is there to keep the team alive and give a high attack buff. Really, just the 3 of them already makes for a lethal combo. The last slot is a flex unit as long as it doesn't interrupt with the Vaporize reaction. A comfortable option would be inserting a Geo unit. A shielder like Zhongli will save Childe from any interruptions or stagger while shredding both Hydro and Pyro resistance, and Albedo can contribute off-field damage while generating crystallized shields and giving an EM buff for reaction damage. Or you can also slot in another Hydro unit. Xingqiu or Yelan can contribute additional DPS and Hydro application while providing their own buffs. Other Hydros like Mona or Ayato can also slot in as long as you can adapt their abilities well to the team's rotation. But putting in an Anemo unit provides a lot of additional utility as well. They can hold the Viridescent set to shred elemental resistance, but each of them will have their own pros and cons on screen for a quick reference. As a special mention, Sucrose is a very good option and can be at par or better than Kazuha depending on what you're trying to do. With Sucrose, you can create an opportunity to double swirl Hydro and Pyro, which is mainly beneficial for shredding both resistances. But it's more mechanically complex, requiring more timing and skill on the player's part. Thankfully, if you're a more casual player, she has a simpler rotation setup that only buffs Xiangling's Vaporize damage but still results in good damage nonetheless. Then, if you slot in Kazuha as the last unit, all members are representatives of different regions, so this team's moniker is the well-known International Team. Aside from being a VV shredder and buffing your team, Kazuha's grouping mechanics are the most convenient and synergistic to work with this team. As the center of the suction, he can easily pull in enemies into Bennett's circle and set them up for Childe's burst. This can be played with a rotation that comes with a simpler setup or a more complicated rotation that enables double swirling with Kazuha so that you simultaneously get the resistance shred plus hydro and pyro damage bonuses. First, Childe's skill will apply hydro around him. Then Bennett's burst will place his circle, but if it applies on a hydro-affected target, it still doesn't consume the hydro aura. It's also important that you don't use Bennett's skill, as that can apply pyro again, getting rid of the hydro aura you need to swirl. Then use Kazuha's hold skill. Hold it so that Bennett's self-infusing pyro application can have enough time to apply, which Kazuha will then infuse his plunge with. This swirls the hydro going up, but then reapplies pyro and swirls after plunging. If you notice that you have both pyro and hydro damage bonuses, then you did it correctly. Then put down Xiangling's burst and skill, use Childe's ranged burst for a nice vaporized nuke, then switch to his melee stance and do your preferred attack combos. You can switch to Kazuha and use his skill to group enemies again, and you can battery Xiangling using Bennett as needed. For the second rotation onwards, the order is still generally applicable, but one main difference is that since Childe's skill is still on cooldown, you first cast Bennett's burst, then reapply hydro with Childe's charged shot. Kazuha will double swirl this with a hold skill, then proceed as usual. The international team can be more complex, but the challenge and reward can be very satisfying.
Riptide!
Let's light it up! Teamwork is trip!
One with nature!
You're toast!
You can run, but you can't hide!
Another option to complement the Childe Xiangling Bennett core is to insert an electro unit, typically Fischl, who complements Childe's general lack of single target damage when fighting bosses. But more importantly, Fischl allows Childe to inflict the electrocharged reaction on enemies. Electrocharge simultaneously maintains the electro and hydro auras, so if pyro hits enemies affected by it, you simultaneously trigger overload and vaporize. That's why this team is called Overvape. You just need to be careful when playing this team against small enemies, since the overload reactions can knock them back. To minimize the knockback, this team is more recommended against enemies that are large and heavy. Another classic Childe team is an electrocharged or Taser comp, which relies on raw hydro and electro damage plus electrocharged reaction damage. Here, Childe is accompanied by two electro units, mainly off-field ones. The classic combo was with Fischl and Beidou. Fischl provides high single target damage while also being a battery, and Beidou synergizes really well with Childe by being an off-field multi-target DPS that provides defensive utility. Other potential electro units that were added later on are Yae, who similarly gives high off-field damage, or Cookie, who can consolidate both healing and electro application at the cost of damage contribution. Of course, the OG Lisa can also fit in here, though she will need high ER to be able to burst on cooldown. The last slot is again flexible. It can be Bennett to provide healing for the team, while units like Fischl and Beidou can snapshot his attack buff. It can also be Animo to reduce both electro and hydro resistance. Or you can insert another off-field hydro like Yelan or Xingqiu, who both deal high single target damage while buffing Childe in their own ways.
Clouds high. The birds.
Eyes on me! Midnight Phantasmal...
Riptide! Wind Strider!
By Royal...
The wind knows me. Falling leaves. Adorn my...
To ashes! Wings of Darkness!
You can run, but you can't hide. No time to lose.
Moving on, the freeze template is very simple, with Childe being the hydro applicator, 2 cryos, and a flex slot. Your cryo options can be mix and match depending on what's available. But the cryos that synergize most here are 4 stars Rosaria and Kaya, a good combo for off-field DPS. You can put Layla for shield comfort or Diona primarily for a combo of shield and healing. Then you have 5-star cryo options, Ayaka or Ganyu for DPS, and Shenhe for buffing cryo units, although you'll have to be particular with maximizing their best rotations. The 4th slot can be another Hydro or cryo unit, or Zhongli, or an Anemo unit depending on your preference. Note that Hydro and cryo auras can be double swirled 2 ways. One is by applying cryo and Hydro on different enemies and swirling them simultaneously. Another is via an underlying Hydro while they're frozen. You can do this by first applying cryo, then using Childe's skill and attacking once, then quickly switching to Kazuha and holding his skill. If you did it correctly, it should show in the stat page that you have both Hydro and cryo damage bonuses. This can also be done with Sucrose. You just do the same process until Childe, then switch to Sucrose and use her skill twice. It will first swirl the underlying Hydro, then the second skill will swirl Cryo. However, doing this every rotation may only be feasible with an R5 Sac Frag equipped. Alternatively, Heizo's skill can do it too. This team is one case where Childe can use the very niche Blizzard Strayer build, which theoretically yields his highest personal DPS output. However, unless you happen to just have an extra Blizzard Strayer set, you should just stick with his standard build on him.
The wind knows me. Clouds hide. The birds...
Judgment! Lights out.
Don't get frostbite. You can run, but you can't hide. Into the wind. Dodge this. Fallen leaves adorn my...
Yeah! Punishment!
Oh, so sorry. Cool it. Rip time.
Judgment!
To wrap up non-Dendro teams, this may not necessarily be a meta pick, but if you're a fan of the Hydro element in general, you can simply comp Childe with fellow Hydro units for extreme wetness. Now that we have a wider selection of Hydro than we did on Childe's first release, choose them to your preference and throw in a VV Anemo unit. Naturally, Xingqiu and Yelan will be a very high DPS combo that works well in tandem with Childe's on-field time. If you're selecting other Hydros with on-field use, just be conscious of their rotation order. Moving on to our Dendro teams, he generally has 2 main variants, Burgeon and Hyperbloom. Unlike a Bloom team where the Hydro unit is preferably the EM trigger, Burgeon and Hyperbloom allow Childe to still take advantage of his attack crit build. Let's discuss Burgeon first, and there are 2 main variants of this team I'll showcase. The first one is a more common Burgeon team. Here we're using Thoma as the Burgeon trigger built with full EM and enough ER, while shielding you from the self-damage of Burgeon. Then Childe is generating blooms and driving Thoma's pyro application while putting out or preventing burning, so his fast Hydro application works to the team's advantage. In Burgeon teams, we don't have to be overly concerned with the number of cores produced since Burgeon deals AoE damage, but you still need sufficient Dendro application. Dendro Traveler or Kole alone can feel lacking in their Dendro app. You can combine them both, although that does make the team a bit too rigid. Nahida thankfully has more suited Dendro application mechanics, letting her enable better Childe Burgeon teams. The 4th slot will then be a flex slot that you can fill in with a role you prefer, like Anemo for grouping, or another Dendro if you really want more core generation. Fischl or Beidou are viable since they don't target Dendro cores, but can help minimize burning on enemies. A second Burgeon variant requires very specific members, Childe, Bennett, Nahida, and Kazuha. This one has been dubbed Intergrassional due to each member being from different nations, making this like international but with grass. It is expensive, requiring 3 limited 5 stars, but at least the result is very fun and strong. Let's look at the rotation to break down how it works. Childe does a melee, normal, and charged attack, applying Hydro and Riptide marks on enemies. Then Kazuha's hold skill helps spread the Hydro further and activate his buffs. Activate Nahida's skill to mark the enemies and generate some seeds, followed by her burst. Put down Bennett's burst and trigger a first wave of Burgeon. Then Kazuha will infuse his burst with Pyro, which then will be your method of triggering Burgeon onwards. Childe will create a huge Vaporize nuke with his burst, and he can start applying Hydro with melee attacks to generate cores. Then Kazuha or Bennett's skill can be used as needed. To restart the rotation, since Childe's skill is still on cooldown, just apply Hydro on enemies with his charged shot if needed.
Everybody stand back!
The wind knows me. As one with wind and cloud. Riptide.
And last but not least is a Hyperbloom team. Just like Burgeon teams, Childe will be paired up with Dendro applicators, and again, it's preferable if you have Nahida. If your Dendro isn't Nahida, Childe's Hydro application can be overwhelming, and what can happen sometimes is you will end up electrocharging more, and the Dendro character will more often trigger blooms. This ends up reducing the number of cores generated, resulting in fewer Hyperblooms. Even then, this team generally feels good to play because Hyperbloom is easy to execute while yielding high damage output. Cookie or Raiden are the highly recommended electro triggers since they're off-field and very convenient to set up. For the last slot, it's flexible as long as it doesn't disrupt the important reactions, and you can fill it up with a role you feel your team needs.
I see everything! Sharing my knowledge!
The wind knows me. Fallen leaves adorn my...
Out of my way!
Riptide. No time to No time to lose.
The Temple of Wisdom!
One with nature, as one with wind and cloud.
Dissipate! I'll settle this! Grow, grow, grow!
You can run, but you can't...
And those are the main Childe teams and templates to try out. As always, there are some more niche synergies out there for players to experiment with, but these are comp ideas to start. Let me know in the comments which Childe team you like the most so far. Hopefully, your parenting journey has been very enjoyable. If this video helped you out, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!